Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ananke Literature Festival 2026. It's a pleasure to have you with us for today's panel, Embodied Histories, Women's Bodies as Archives. Thank you for joining us for this session. This LitFest has always been a space for conversations that challenge how we understand literature, culture, identity, and justice. This year's theme, Fault Lines and Unmasking, invites us to examine the visible and invisible fractures that shape our lives across nations, communities, histories, and even within ourselves. Today's discussion speaks directly to that invitation. When we think about history, we often imagine archives, museums, official records, and institutions. We tend to assume that history exists in documents, which is written, catalogued, and preserved. But what happens when entire lives, communities, and experiences are left out of those records? What happens when the official archive is silent? This panel begins with a different proposition that women's bodies have always been archives. Across generations, history has survived not only in texts, but in rituals, in adornment, in touch, performance, memory, and collective acts of care. They have been carried in practices passed from mother to daughter, from elder to younger, from community to community. Today, we explore those living archives through three distinct yet deeply interconnected practices: the traditions of henna, Mesopotamian tattooing, and Moroccan public bathing and cleansing rituals. Together, they ask us to consider where knowledge resides, who preserves it, and what it truly means to decolonize history. We are fortunate to be joined by three remarkable scholars and practitioners whose work bridges disciplines while remaining rooted in questions of memory, identity, and women's lived experiences. Our first panelist is Sabyn Javeri, a writer, translator, and practice-based researcher whose work explores henna, embodiment, and women's aesthetic labor as forms of cultural memory. Drawing together multilingual storytelling, feminist literary studies, ethnography, visual experimentation, and translation, her research investigates how ritual and artistic practice function as living archives across South Asia, the Gulf, and the South Asian diaspora in the United Kingdom. She teaches at the NYU Abu Dhabi and at the University of Oxford. Joining her is Najwa Belkziz, a historian whose research examines how women in marginalized communities across North Africa and Southeast Asia remember, narrate, and contest the past in everyday life. Her work explores the tension between state-curated histories and vernacular memory, combining archival research with oral history and sensory ethnography to understand how ritual, care, and embodiment become forms of historical knowledge beyond institutional records. And we are also delighted to welcome Özlem Özhabeş, a theater director, performer, and a lecturer whose creative practice investigates voice, body, memory, and feminist dramaturgy. Through directing, devising, and cross-cultural storytelling, she uncovers the hidden structures embedded within language, image, and performance, creating spaces where untold history can be experienced as much as they are spoken. Although each of our panelists come from a different discipline, creative writing, history, and theater, they share a common commitment to asking profound questions about memory, power, and the ways women preserve knowledge beyond conventional archives. And that idea captures the heart of today's session. So wherever you're joining us from the world, thank you very much for this. We hope it encourages you to think differently about history. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful panelists. And with that, I would like to ask them to start the conversation.
Thank you so much, Namrata. That was very generous introduction. Shall we start by telling you a little bit about the project and how it all came together?
Sure, that would be great.
Right. So I'll take the lead, and then I hope my colleagues would be able to join me. So the project actually started through a series of spontaneous conversations at NYUAD, NYU's Abu Dhabi campus, where the three of us work. And we had been talking and thinking for a while about ways that scholarship truly needs to be decolonized. Not just scholarship, but also artistic practice and basically storytelling. And there had been a lot of discussion around decolonizing. However, it got us thinking a little bit about what does it really mean to decolonize knowledge production? It led us to thinking about what constitutes as knowledge, and who is this knowledge being produced for? Who has access to it? And there were a series of conversations where my colleague Najwa told me about growing up with the ritual of hammams and cleansing and how that had changed with modernity. And my colleague Özlem telling me about her grandmother who used to recite the Quran, which she had memorized through a rocking motion rather than relying on literacy, which is how people usually learn to read. And there were a series of conversations about practices where knowledge was being contained and also being passed on. So in a sense, doing the work that archives do. However, that method was not officially considered archival because it didn't fit in to the academy's idea of what constitutes as an archive. And this led us to thinking about how ritual culture is passed on when it is not done so through an official narrative. I was also looking at the idea of henna, and how the practice of henna is passed on from mother to daughter, different traditions, how it's carried on. And so through these series of conversations, we came about with this idea that it would be very interesting to interpret this in a truly decolonized way, where we really interpreted it according to the way that we thought this idea of women's bodies as archives should be documented. So that's where the idea sprang from. So I'll let my colleagues add something now.
For me, as a historian of memory and transitional justice, I often look at what happens after periods of violence, and how societies remember this political violence, what gets officially recognized, what gets silenced, and what kinds of archives are produced in that process. And a recurrent pattern that I came across when studying, for example, Morocco, was how women were leading this process and this and activism, and how they were leading human rights movements in the country, yet their stories were often minimized or didn't shine through as much as men in these archives. So I started thinking about these voices, women's voices, and the voices of marginalized groups in these societies, not just post-conflict societies, but in general. So, and thinking about how much can fall outside of these formal processes of remembering. So, and transitional justice tends to engage with certain forms of evidence, like testimony, documentations, like official archives, truth and commission reports, even museums, like you mentioned, and memorials. And as I mentioned, even when women's experiences are included, they're incorporated through these established forms, and again, much is lost in this form of representation. So I became I became interested in these frameworks, and through our talks with my colleague Sabyn and Özlem, I started thinking about how much more voices in like larger contexts are missing, and thinking about my personal, my family's histories and personal histories. I was fascinated about how some women were quite central in my life story, but were completely missing from official recognition or even public acknowledgement. I've become quite interested in the project because I really wanted to tell their story, especially when it comes to hammam or the bathing rituals in Morocco, how they come about, what stories they carry, because it's such a central site, as I mentioned, where all members of the society convene and converge on a weekly basis, and that has changed throughout the history of Morocco, and in itself it tells a very interesting story about Morocco, told from the perspective of these women, not only the women that actually go in these bathing sites or the hammams and with their families and with their daughters, etc., but also the women that actually perform these cleaning and bathing rituals, what we call the hammam attendants. And I really want to tell their stories.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. Özlem, would you like to share next?
Sure. As Sabyn said, I've always been very interested in how women learn things differently, because in Turkey, especially, women were illiterate for a very long time, and still women in my field research, they are still illiterate. They don't know Turkish, the official language, and they don't have access to reading or writing. So coming from my grandma's, she never read or wrote in Turkish, but she knew the Quran by heart. She would recite it, and she would give us lectures about how we should behave and all that. And the way she carried that story was how painful it was to learn it, but at the same time, the relationships she shared with her friends who taught her. So I started to become really interested in how these mechanisms were passed from woman to woman. And when I started to look at the deck tattoos in popular narrative, I saw it that it's represented as something Kurdish. And once I started to look at the field, I realized that that's another nation building storytelling, because it's again an oppressed, ostracized, and tortured community within the Turkish Republic. And now trying to build their own history, they claim that. And more I looked into it, I realized through migration routes, it comes all the way from North Africa, Mesopotamia, even Southeast Asia. And I was fascinated by the fact that it's mainly a history passed from women, carved from women's bodies into women's bodies. And this story can be told through archives, but then what I realized that they don't even know the meanings of the symbols that they carved into each other's bodies. So the stories change, the symbols change, the history changes, but what they remember is the relationship. Who made the tattoo? When was it? When did it happen? Who said that it was a sin? So the story keeps changing its shape and turns into different ways of storytelling. For example, when I started to first look at it, as I said, thinking that it was a Kurdish tradition, I realized that they take it from mainly Arab shair, like poet, traveler poets. I think it's the same name in Urdu, shahir. And so they were traveling communities. So they don't know who they were. So they take over this tradition, claim it for themselves. They don't even claim it. The historians claim them. when they write the history. Women never claim them. They say, I saw it from my mother, I saw it from my grandmother, or I saw it from a shair. So no one claims anything. And then when it's rewritten, everyone takes their part of it. So that, and also when it comes to Armenian women during the displacement and genocide, they were tattooed by force, so it was completely unconsensual, and that they had a completely different history behind their own disowning that history. So to me, how to look at this without being an archivist, because if you look at an archive perspective, then it's like, what is the symbol, what is the meaning, what is the history? But when you look at stories, then it starts to shift a lot. And I'm really interested in trying to find what these women tell each other, how they carve this painful thing into each other's bodies, and how it keeps changing meaning. And the archive becomes this constantly changing, growing, diminishing, disappearing, reappearing organism by itself.
It is so interesting. I'm so fascinated by the topic that you all have chosen. Actually, I have been recently working on an article which has now turned into a longer thing where I'm tracing memory as an archive by women, but in South Asian literature. I'm only looking for specific books which are using memory as an archive with women protagonists. And a lot of what they have written and shared about is what you are talking about. And it is fascinating to see how it all is coming together, across different parts of the world. And I'm also struck by the fact that your archives are all ephemeral, henna fades, tattoos age with skin, rituals exist only when they are practiced, and performances disappear when they end. And still, these forms have often survived longer than their official narratives. So, why do you think embodied traditions can prove to be so resilient? Najwa, would you like to answer first?
Sure. So, if you're, for example, in the case of the hammam, if you're familiar with the concept, especially that it has become quite popular in Morocco as a heritage or a spa industry, or in the Gulf or in Europe, it's often talked about as a social space for women, wellness or self-care. But when you look deeper at these, rituals of scrubbing, your skin shedding, and what happens in between, fetching water, washing your hair, etc., then it's so rich with data that can tell us more. It tells us about these rituals and these women, but also tells us about labor, about class relations, about intimacy and concepts of intimacy, and how these are defined and embodied and lived through between these women, not just as defined by some scholars in books or in official archives. It also tells us about economic change. A lot of data that I compiled reveals how, for example, COVID had an impact on not only on women who couldn't find a space to bathe, because often Moroccan households from a certain class don't necessarily have running hot water, so they need to go on a weekly basis to go to this hammam, public bath, to bathe. And again, also with that, perform that ritual of socializing, of sharing knowledge, and also engage in, as I mentioned, these economies of affection that sustain some of these Moroccan women. So to answer your question, I don't see them as ephemeral. I see these memories are living archives. They sustain a strong relationship to the present, but also to the past. So, and because these memories are carried in the body, they're also transmitted through generations. And here, that's why it is quite important to document and to talk to these women and to investigate these sites, because in case, as we see with the transformation of the henna industry, or the henna practices, or the hammam industry. Yes, we do have that transformation, that modernization from a traditional Moroccan hammam, where all these memories of the past reveal to us what is happening to these women in Morocco from their perspective. But also, there is a chance and a risk that these sites become at risk, because we have as you may know, Morocco is a very touristy country, and there is a push for these sites to become heritage sites and become wellness centers and catering to certain specific women. For example, instead of it's a quite intense and site. So, for example, when you're catering for a foreigner or for a tourist, then definitely they're not going to stand that heat and that noise that often, and that very intimate practices that are often embodied and experienced by Moroccan women as part of that weekly ritual. So yes, perhaps in that sense they are ephemeral, but that's the entire idea behind our project, to trace that transformation and to make sure that these voices are documented and shared with the rest of the world.
Thank you so much, Najwa. Sabyn, we were actually discussing that the fact that all your archives are all ephemeral, henna fades, tattoos age with skin, rituals exist only when practiced. Performances disappear when they end. So, but still we have these forms which have survived longer than official narratives. So why do you think embodied traditions can prove to be so resilient?
Just trying to unmute myself. I think that is the beauty of it, I think when you have these official narratives in these state archives, firstly, there's a hierarchy, because someone somewhere has decided that this is important enough to be preserved, right? But when you have skin as testimony, it is so organic, because skin changes, expands, shrinks, wrinkles, the henna, the tattoo, the cleansing, it changes with age, with texture. There is a sensory element to it, for sure. But then there is also, with skin and with that temporality, the idea of intimacy, the idea of touch, and therefore the idea of a real and lasting connection. So while they may appear to be temporary, they're actually long-lasting, right? Because they are preserved in a different way, in a way that embodies the memory, and not just some state archive or some textbook or some museum, which again is a kind of authoritarian gesture, right? And I think when we talk about decolonizing, when we talk about something that lasts through the times, when we really talk about something that is truly historical and truly a way of knowledge being passed on in history, then that has to be something more than an archive which is documented on paper, right? A narrative which is very one-sided. a narrative that can be preserved, maybe even turned, preserved on paper, maybe even turned into a soft copy. But at the end of the day, that narrative belongs to the person who decided that this is valuable, right? It's not truly embodied. It's not truly felt. It isn't organic. So that's how I like to think of ritual as more lasting than a state-organized narrative or textbook.
That was interesting, Sabyn. Thank you. Özlem, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. It's really, to me, one of the most interesting facts that we realized was when we went to the field, women were surprised, or I mean, not anymore, because it's kind of a touristic thing to do. Like, you go and talk to these women with tattoos, and they're like, we've done this. It's just for beauty. We don't care about it. Why do we care about it so much? But for a younger generation, it became a way of claiming their self narrative. So even that shift within the understanding of what these things were, and also it comes from a very intimate women to women relationship that comes from silencing, because most of the women didn't have any say when they were doing the tattoos. So what they did was, for example, if they didn't want their husband to marry a second or third wife, they would have a small sign in their palms where it's not very visible, to wish that their husband wouldn't bring another woman to the house. But once that woman comes, because that's usually the case, they get to see it. So it's kind of, or for example, some of them, like most of them, were migrant communities which don't exist after the Ottoman Empire, late Ottoman Empire, and Turkish Republic. They were forced to move to villages, and then by Turkish Republic, they were displaced from those villages to other places. But they carry the memory of their like 11, 12-year-old friends within communities. So the Kurdish community would be like migrating from one village, one mountain to the other, alongside with an Arab family. And when they would shepherd their animals, these girls at the age of 11, 12, they would do it together, and they would make tattoos to each other. So it was a way of communicating and learning each other's languages, so that they would pass knowledge. Now, none of the Arab women talk Kurdish, none of the Kurdish women talk Arabic, but they carry tattoos made by their friends and their photos in their pockets. And now there's a Syrian border in between, so that they can't see each other. These ephemeral, or not, I mean, they're carried in their skins, so we get to see the symbols on their skins. We see them, they see, like, as soon as they see yours, they get excited, they want to show. So it creates a way of storytelling that's not possible through any other means. And also, very interestingly, there's this Potibelli temple in Urfa, which is 12,000 years old. It's one of the first found temples that brought together migrant communities. And the symbols that these women are carrying on their skins are the same with those. But they don't have any knowledge of where they remember. Sometimes they even say they did it instinctively. So they don't even know there's a symbol. They say, no, I made it up. But from somewhere, like, you see that in another temple somewhere. So it's that carried memory it can be traced as a historical from a historical point of view, but for them, it's just carried knowledge and embodied knowledge, which don't, and one more thing, I think that's quite interesting, like politically. For example, the Arab communities believe, after that they claim tattoos are haram, the Arab community believes that they will be teared off with nails in hell, and the Kurdish community believe that they will be removed with pliers. So like both of them are really horrible ways of torture. So that teaches us a lot from the communal memory, communal, like, imaginary, like how do you say, shared imaginary, that image of torture. So if we trace it back, we can learn a lot about the state histories, I think.
Mhm.
Thank
I
you
can
so much. Yeah, please.
I'd just like to add to that, and yes, and I think similarly in my research on henna, um, you know, not only is it a way of communities gathering and have shared common culture across borders, because we presented our research in Exeter earlier this year, and there were students from India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all over South Asia, who connected with this idea of henna as something, something related to celebration before Eid or on weddings. It was interesting to see the common designs. That there was much commonality between South Asian designs compared to maybe Arab or Moroccan designs, which were more simpler. The South Asian ones were more complicated, more aesthetic, more refined. And also, again, yes, it is a way of intimacy, not just amongst women. Of course, there is the act of holding the palm, holding the wrist, conveying directions that hold, keep it on for this long, use lemon, etc. But also little rituals such as in Pakistan, for instance, on the wedding night, when the henna is applied to the bride, a small alphabet of the husband's first name is inscribed somewhere in the palm. It's hidden in a very complicated design, and then the groom has to find it. And usually that's the first encounter, the first intimate encounter where the man gets to hold the woman's hand, and the woman is touched by her husband to be. So it's also these sort of rituals, traditions, ancient cultures of bringing people together, which are carried on, which you would not find in an ethnographic book or in any sort of official archive if you were to look at it. So yeah, just wanted to add to that.
That's very interesting. So my next question to all of you is, many embodied traditions have historically been passed from woman to woman without formal instructions. So what do you think happens when those chains of transmission are disrupted by migration, urbanization, conflict, or changing social norms? How do you think it impacts that?
I can start if you want. I mean, because you said migration,
Sure, absolutely. Please.
Migration was the first way that these tattoos were transmitted from community to community. But at the same time, it was the way it was blocked. Because what happened was these migrating communities passed the knowledge from each other, or shahirs or poets. They went from village to village, spread the knowledge. But once the state started to control and wouldn't allow for migration, they were left in their villages with quite conservative ways of living. So it was all banned, and they stopped marking their. And also one more thing, they were more exposed to the city life. And once they started to have the encounter with city people, in order not to be ostracized or pointed out, they stopped marking them. So it's like in 2 generations, there are no tattoos whatsoever. And the workers' movement in the 70s and the asylum seekers in the 80s, when they moved to Germany, they weren't allowed to have tattoos on their faces if they wanted to, they couldn't find work. So they got them erased either by laser or chemicals, horrible processes. So migration routes caused the tattoos to kind of spread, but at the same time to cease. That was really interesting, part of my research that I discovered.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Najwa, would you like to share next?
Sure. I think all of our cases deal with transformation through displacement or migration. And I think all of us are looking at how these memories are either reactivated, transmitted first, then activated and performed in the diaspora. So in my case, with all these practices, they're quite sensory, and they're activated through, in my case, heat, smell, touch, even steam. So the memories are transmitted are not just through that, a single story, but when these women are sharing these memories with me, they are they're not retelling necessarily a single event, but a practice that their bodies know. So, for example, how they prepare the body, how they scrub prepare the body with certain material to soften it before scrubbing it, how to relax the body so that the attendant can scrub it, how to ask for help, or how to use the space in the hammam, etc. And I found out through my interviews that these women tend to know this. It's not necessarily transmitted as an instruction or a guideline, but their bodies know it. And so, for example, it's transmitted, through the sight. Yes, absolutely, it's transformed when you speak to a hammam attendant, for example, in Marrakesh versus a hammam goer in Montreal or in Abu Dhabi. You see that they follow these practices that their bodies know, but absolutely that, for example, intimacy between these women is quite restricted, for example, in a site in Montreal, and practiced by, let's say, migrant women or Moroccan or immigrants in Montreal, in Abu Dhabi. But you see that there is a continuation between the grandmother, perhaps in Morocco, and the mother who moved to an urban setting or to a city in Morocco, and then the granddaughter in a diaspora context. So absolutely, these memories are transformed, and they draw on similar bodily practices, but their notions and understandings of care, of body intimacy, even beauty, and some of the beauty materials are transformed, but I also see that sometimes they are reactivated through these bodily practices. And there's some sort of nostalgia that we see with these women in diasporic context. It seems like they are looking, they are really longing for these practices. Is it a nostalgia to their countries, or is it a nostalgia to a certain time, or to that intimacy, or to those childhood memories? But it seems that they cannot detach from these practices or these memories. They're like embedded, and it might sound counterintuitive because they're shedding their literally shedding their skin, but they are carved in their bodies, these memories and these practices they cannot detach from. That's what I've noticed when I talk to these women in diaspora, especially in Montreal.
Thank you so much, Najwa. Sabyn?
Yeah, I think so. Henna is, a ritual that has migrated all over the globe, right? So when we talk about migration, if we are talking about diasporic communities who carry the ritual of henna. Part of it is performative. It is a way to perform culture, heritage, whether it's through Eid celebrations or through weddings, etc. But I think there is another part of it that I have come across again and again in my research, which is the economics of it. How the practice of henna has also provided economic opportunities to diasporic women, especially in the Gulf, where on Chandrat or weddings, I mean, there's a huge wedding economy, and many of the women who are henna artists are usually migrant women from India or Pakistan. So it becomes a sort of an informal labor industry, which is performing this artistic cultural ritual. And again, in the UK as well, I have come across many young students from South Asia or from the Middle East who do henna tattoos in marketplaces as a way of just making a little bit of extra money. Going back to the Gulf, there is also a culture of very high-end henna artists who are flown in from different parts of the world, who then create specialized henna patterns for the bride. So it's also, sort of a multi-million industry, aesthetic industry as well. So I think I am looking at a slightly different angle, less romanticized, more of a sort of an economic angle where it is providing sustenance, financial sustenance to a community. And I think that also is a way of looking at migration and how embodied practices, when migrants embrace it in forms of informal labor, how that comes about.
Thank you so much, Sabyn. My next question to you is, in an era which is increasingly shaped by digital technologies and AI, where so much of our memory is externalized into devices, databases, and other forms, what might embodied forms of remembering teach us about knowledge, care, and community that digital archives cannot?
Who would like to take that?
You can start, no problem, Sabyn. We can.
I think it's all the more urgent that we look at embodied practices. In fact, I think the urge for me to really look at something that was embodied came from this idea of this rising notion of digitalization, emerging technology. I think there is, at least within me, a great yearning to return to embodied knowledge, embodied practices, and to look at how culture, ritual, memory, imagination can survive outside of that digital space. And one of the ways that I'm resisting that is that my research is something that I'm trying to interpret not just in the form of a written archive, but in terms of artistic practices, which are more about imperfection than perfection. Because another thing that is emerging with digitalization and technology is this push towards refinement, towards perfection, towards everything being very, very, very correct. And I think we are losing the idea of human imperfection. So in the artistic practice that I'm doing, I'm looking at those, the idea of erosion, the idea of leaving gaps, leaving spaces. So what I do is I take photographs of henna, and then I use a gel plate to strip that photograph of its chemical composition. And then I paint into those spaces which are left behind by hand. So that's my way of resisting this idea of digital optimization and perfection, which again, I think is a very curated practice, a very curated idea, and leads back to the idea of the official archive, where only selected pieces of knowledge are preserved.
Lovely. Thank you. Özlem, would you like to share next?
Yes, sure. When I was doing my research, a few things really caught my attention. Firstly, what can be shared in public, what can be shared within women? Because whenever we had any men around, women wouldn't talk to us. They would just stay silent or give the answers that they thought would be okay. As soon as we went behind closed doors, anything was possible. Beyond imagination. So that's joy and pain that can be shared. I think that cannot be that's not public knowledge. That cannot go with behind those doors. But to know that that's possible and you are safe and you can share and you can carve it and she would be there and you would be there for her. That's something that's not AI, that can't be digitalized, that knowledge is just in your body. And also warning that like all these women, like, be careful, because the mothers would carve warnings to their daughters' faces to remind them of not to do certain things, not to repeat certain mistakes. So that's also it's very intimate, and that intimate touch, as Sabyn said, cannot be replaced with anything else. And two more things: imperfection. There are tattoos, like massive tattoos on these women's bodies that are half done because it was so painful. So this resistance to being perfect and making everything beautiful, versus where you can start something and just say, okay, I'm done with this. It's too painful. I'll leave it. And I'm 90 and I carry it proudly. Carrying proudly your imperfection, your pain, the half-done job in your body, I think it gives a very it gives us a knowledge that we try not to practice anymore, I guess, with all this. And alternative medicine, so to speak. The tattoos are done with soot, with animal gallbladder and colostrum, the breast milk that feeds the girl only. And they're all used in ancient medicine for like for aches, for skin diseases. They don't even talk about it. They don't even care. But every single material they use is used for, so transmitting that knowledge through centuries, millennia, without even writing it down. I think, yeah, AI cannot code that, I guess.
Thank you for such a fascinating insight. Najwa, would you like to share next?
Yeah, I do agree with both Özlem and Sabyn. Perhaps I'd like to highlight 2 points. Whether in this in thinking about this project, whether we are thinking about like an accurate representation, not accurate, but like that polished rendition of the past, which is not, as I mentioned, which is not what embodied memories do. They don't tell a story of a single event. So we want to move away from this idea. I mean, even in oral histories, we start thinking about there isn't only one memory, but memories, and we acknowledge that memories are malleable, and we do know that memories, even from a physiological and like in a physiological sense, that they're not reliable, right? That they're changing each time you remember. You form a new memory of that same event. So we want to think or rethink this idea of rendition of the past, and how true whatever meaning you want to give to the idea or the concept of truth in this in this era. So we want to think about that and how it relates to this idea of embodied memories and practices. But if I am to, for example, especially with these rituals and practices that we're researching, they involve so many senses, right? So you can describe to AI for example, the hammam space. You can share with it, the steps to how to perform a cleaning or bathing ritual in Morocco, how to apply the savon, the soap, the Belkziz soap, right? How to use the scrubber or whatever you call it, how to engage with the attendant, etc. And it may render or produce like quite close representation of the space, or perhaps the ritual, but I don't think it can produce a close representation of that heat, of that sound and noise of the clicking, all the material that we're using, the sound of women talking as this, the scrubbing, and I guess that's the type of knowledge we're interested in. We're trying to say that knowledge is as important and as valuable, more than that, as Sabyn mentioned, curated version of the past that we often deposit in an archive or in a museum or in a book, because I believe that those are the memories that are that sustain our relationships with the past, because you live through them each and every time you remember them. You don't seek them out; it's part of your living environment. You don't necessarily need to go to a museum or to a site to remember that past, but you actually they are a lived or embodied practice and ritual. So whether AI or technology would transform those memories, I reckon to a certain point, because we can see the transformation, for example, of the hammam space and ritual, and even economies, like Sabyn mentioned. There's a economic transformation of the hammam site. What these women earn from this labor, but also how often they go to the hammam, because obviously the prices have gone up. So, and against this transformation, I think there's going to be that generation to generation, mother to daughter transmission that's going to sustain that relationship to the past. And we're hoping through our project to offer these as alternative forms of knowledge, away from that curated, polished rendition of the past.
Thank you so much, Najwa. That was very beautiful. I would have loved to continue this conversation, but we are running a little short of time. So this is my last question to you before we wrap up. This year's festival theme is fault lines and unmasking. So before we close, I would like to ask each one of you to complete this sentence. If women's bodies are archives, then the future of history depends on... Any
Her
of you can go. Yeah.
Depends on her story.
Wow. That's lovely. Najwa?
Can you repeat that sentence for me, please?
Yeah, sure. If women's bodies are archives, then the future of history depends on...
Preserving those archives.
Özlem?
Oh. So it depends on touch.
Lovely, powerful. Any closing thoughts that you would like to share before we wrap up?
Thank you for giving us space on your platform. And I think it was a really interesting conversation, not just talking about what the body remembers as history, what the body preserves, what the body passes on, but also this idea of impermanence, of memories as transitional, transformational, ritual as touch, economies of care. I think we touched upon some really interesting things which get forgotten in this fast-paced age of AI, where it's all about perfection, permanence, and optimization. So I think it was a necessary discussion to remember what really constitutes as lasting knowledge.
Well said, Sabyn. Thank you, Sabyn and Amrita. And thank you, Ananke. I really value the work you do to put forth women's voices in the region. So thanks for the invitation and giving us space to share our research.
As we come to the end of our conversation, I would like to thank each one of you for sharing your scholarship, creativity, and insights with such generosity. It has reminded us again that history is not only found in documents, monuments, or institutional archives. Thank you so much for this timely conversation. And we hope it sparks many more discussions long after today's session has ended. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.